Hey, thanks so much for listening to the Ridge Community Church podcast. My name is John. I'm one of the pastors on staff at the Ridge, and our vision is to bring the hope of Jesus into every home. So as a piece of that, our goal each week is to bring you something that's hopeful and helpful. So subscribe to this podcast to make sure you don't miss any hopeful and helpful conversations. Hey everyone, and thanks for listening to this episode of the Ridge Community Church podcast. If you find today's episode hopeful and helpful, then please follow or subscribe, and then rate and review so that more people can find the conversation. Well, I'm excited to share this week's conversation with you that Kelly Ager, our Compassion Director, and I got to have with Pastor Oleg from Moldova. See, Pastor Oleg was our connection point in Ukraine, serving the people displaced by war during our resource drive earlier this year. He's the pastor of New Hope Eurasia, a church in Moldova that has really made an impact on Eastern Europe through their willingness to serve others. Pastor Oleg has an amazing faith journey that I'm excited for you to hear as he shared it with us about how he came to faith in the Soviet Union, the persecution he faced then and still faces now, and what it really means to suffer for Jesus. This is our conversation with Pastor Oleg. Well, we have a couple of special guests for this episode today. Special co-host, Kelly Ager, our Compassion Director. Thanks for coming on the podcast and co-hosting with me.
Glad to be on with you, John.
And special guest, who's also speaking at the Ridge. I'll peek behind the curtain. Today is Thursday as we're recording this, so he hasn't spoken yet, but he's going to be speaking this weekend. Pastor Oleg, thanks for coming on the podcast again.
Oh, what a joy and what an honor to be back with you. Thank you so much for, inviting me to be on this podcast.
No, the honor is all ours. We were just chatting right before we started recording that, I got lots of comments and just great feedback from last time we had our conversation, just really meaningful things. And so an honor to be able to chat again. I'm curious, so the last time that we chatted earlier this year, you mentioned just really briefly some of your faith story. And I was so interested, but we were so focused on what we were doing to impact in Ukraine, and we didn't get a chance to dive into it. But now we have a little more time. So would you mind just sharing maybe a little bit about how you grew up and what made you decide to follow Jesus?
Yeah, thank you so much for asking about that. I think everyone's story is a special one. And it's his story in our life. And I'm honored to be able to share what he's done to be able to, to change my life. And not only, I grew up in the Soviet Moldova. This was part of the bigger Russia. At that time, Soviet regime. My story is connected to, my family being, involved in government, involved with a government that was against God, for a long time, for almost a century. A government that is being persecuting the church. A family that was involved, in building a regime, a building they called heaven on earth. And the reality is, without God, there is nothing that you can build that would be heaven on earth. So that's why, it's been a desire of mine to be able to, I've been seeking for, something more, something that is more than just what we've been taught. We've been taught that we're animals. Evolution, it was the main thing that was embraced in the educational system. So we've been taught that we're just animals and that our Soviet government can exploit us as animals. We are born, we die, and that's it. There is no meaning, there is no purpose. And I was contemplating, is this it? But I didn't know exactly where to go and find an answer. My grandfather, who lived not too far, I would talk to him. He said, Grandpa, you are a hero of the Second World War. Look at all these medals. You probably know the purpose and the meaning of life. And he's like, this is not a question that we ask. You got to live now, do what the government asks you to do, work hard until you're done. And I'm like, that's not fulfilling. That's not an answer. So I started, just kind of mingling with some of my friends. And they said, look, as we were talking about some of this stuff, they said, look, one of my friends was like, my grandfather probably can answer your question. And so he's introduced me to this guy, an older man I'm not sure teenagers today would even be interested to talk an older man talk about, meaning of life and purpose. But at that time, I got introduced to him. And, by the way he just interacted with us, simple language, because I was totally disconnected from church, Bible, God, whatever. It was literally, God was not even mentioned in a swear in my family. So it was a completely prohibited topic in my home. So the moment I got this, interaction and this connection, and he got me more interested in all of that, I asked him about the meaning of life and the purpose of why we exist and where we come from. And he's like, I'm the right person to, for you to ask. I'm like, what? He's like, I'm a follower of Jesus. I'm like, what is that?
Yeah.
Who is that Uncle Jesus? Because I had no idea.
Yeah.
Who is that following whom? Seriously, I was so disconnected with church. Churches didn't exist. Church existed only in homes. Churches existed only in small groups underground. For about 100 years, there was a lot of persecution against the church. And that man was also persecuted heavily by the Soviet regime, by the government. They took away his kids. 2 of his kids actually grew up in an orphanage. At that time, government would not allow Christians to have their own children because they said these Christians, they educate their kids in a spirit and in a mindset that is not okay for the government. So they were seen as a threat to the regime, a threat to the government. Probably it's nothing new under the sun. Some of the governments, they still think that way. They just don't act that way yet. Some of them already act. But so that's how I got to connect with Jesus kind of firsthand through a man who suffered for Christ.
Now, when you say persecuted, I know everybody's mind probably jumps to 1,000 different places and their perspective on what it means to be persecuted. But could you share, what did persecution look like at that time?
No, persecution was then. Persecution happens today. Yeah. Persecution is part of a Christian life. It is, Jesus said your master and your king was persecuted, so you will be as well. Persecution is not something that we as Christians should avoid. We are not asking for it. At that time, followers of Christ did not ask for persecution, but persecution meant imprisonment. Gulags, which is work camps, the labor camps. They would send Christians to be so-called re-educated, and trying to break their faith. Where? To the, close to the North Pole, in the coldest parts of Siberia. Some of them were persecuted for smuggling Bibles, and some of them were for printing Bibles in the basements of their homes. Some were persecuted for being bold with their faith and sharing it, in their family, with their, just neighbors. And it was not just a phone call from a neighbor, that would just report to police or to the government. There was actually departments that were of the government, like, branches of the government that were in charge of fighting so-called, anti, government, political rebels, religious rebels and stuff. So anything that was not the way the government wanted it was all rebellious, So they went crashing people, taking kids away, fines, firing people from their jobs, bullied and mocked, and
I do remember a story that you were telling me when we were in Moldova of how you were lined up in school and kids would walk past and spit in your face. Like, we're told
yes,
to spit in your face.
Yeah, that would be like, putting a corridor, like running you through that middle of 500 plus kids, and they would spit in your face and say, you are a shame. You are the shame to our society, our country, to your family. Persecution also meant your family relatives would turn away from you and completely reject you. being beaten, kicked out of the house multiple times, and just, getting on the street and looking for where is a Christian home that would take me in.
So when this man was sharing with you the very beginning of your faith story, when he was telling you about this person named Jesus, he was risking a tremendous amount by just talking to you about it.
Yes.
Did that illustrate something to you? Did that show you, was that an inspiration? How did you interact with that?
No, first of all, it's because I had no idea who's Jesus. So I didn't really know the risk that he's taking on. I only realized the risk that he was taking on after my dad, when he found out that I was actually, climbing the fence, going to pray for a couple of minutes in the house of that man. As I would come out of school, I'd just sneak into their home first before I would come, through the gate to my parents' home, just to pray, have a quick word of encouragement from that man and his wife. He always, treated us with, borscht, which is like a red soup with beets and all of that, and, dark bread that, with butter and salt on it. I would go in and sneak in, and I always knew that his wife, Ducia, she would always have that for lunch, and that would give me a time to pray quickly, eat quickly, and go sneak in my parents' home. My dad found that. When he discovered that I am interacting with him, and that brought fines, loss of job for that man. I knew that, but also I knew that I had to pay the price as well. I was dragged out of that home, and then, physically abused for, deciding to go pray. And when I told boldly to my dad, I am a follower of Jesus, I believe in him, he said, "You are undermining our family, and you're putting our family in jeopardy with the government. We're going to lose all of our benefits. We might end up, getting ourselves in trouble." So that's when the depth of the price for sharing Jesus with me and me following Jesus, started revealing to me. It became more real.
I will never understand or know what that feels like. I mean, understand, yes. Sympathize, absolutely. But I'll never know the depths of what that looks like. And to think that we're the same age, right?
I think you're younger.
Right answer.
Right, yeah, I think that's always the right answer, right?
we're not talking 100 years ago.
This is, I think when persecution comes, you just take it. It's a great honor to suffer for Christ. I want to tell you this. There's no greater honor than to suffer for him. Suffer with him. You see, Paul said, for me to know him and his suffering, it is all I'm striving for. And for me, suffering and persecution doesn't mean 30 years ago. I know what means, recent persecution. When you get beaten, guitars broken off of your heads, swollen faces, knocked down without any conscience. Just your wife has been beaten, where you get ridiculized, your kids are laughed on, that they're followers of Jesus, or mocked, bullied. All of this, or, you are put in front of a situation where, you feel like, for example, I was less than a month ago, I am in customs, and I'm carrying 3,500 New Testaments in Ukrainian language, and they get arrested, get confiscated. And the guy at the customs looks in my eyes and says, "You know what? You're going to get a court process against you for that. You may end up with a big fine for it." So what for? We have the freedom. And he's like, semi-freedom. Understand? He said, "Why you're not afraid of me?" I looked boldly in his eyes and I said, "You know why I'm not?" This guy is in his 30s, and he knew about all the pastors who suffered for the sake of Christ and for the sake of the Bible that, were before me. He said, are you bold because your former pastors would go into prison for that? I said, if needed, I would go for it as well. He said, you're too bold. I said, why should I not? And this is, you're talking to the officials, and you look in the customs guy who can, confiscate, write your fine, get you in trouble. And you look boldly in his eyes and said, I'm not afraid of you. Do what you got to do. We'll fight back. But if not, we'll just take it.
We just talked about how compassion means suffering together. And never thought about wearing that as boldly as a badge of honor. More of a serving component and less serving others and less of a serving Jesus. And thank you. There's a quote in there somewhere.
Yeah. Like intellectually, I think it's not that hard to grasp this idea that to suffer for Jesus is an honor, is so rewarding, is so powerful, is so meaningful. But there's this gap between the brain and knowing it and truly believing it and having it internalized in our hearts. Right. How did you get there to where it was no longer just a thought you had or a truth you knew, but instead something that you truly believed and were willing to act on?
That's a long question.
Sorry, I was so curious. It's so good. It's like,
yeah, it's I would say this. It's hard to grasp it with your mind. To rationalize suffering for sake of Christ, it is not the way to go. Because nobody wants suffering. This is not part of who we are. Right. We don't want suffering. Mm-hmm. We're not welcoming suffering. We're not looking for it. That's not normal for us.
No, we want comfort.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's why to rationalize suffering, it is difficult. It's probably not a matter of rationalizing or, make it a theory or a philosophy of suffering. Let's just know. Suffering is part of our growth. It is part of the way we grow in Christ Jesus. It comes in doses, little by little, and you take a little bit and it grows you, and then you're getting ready for the next. Now, if you are afraid, you see, in love, there is no fear, but perfect love casts all fear away. So fear is the greatest impediment to taking suffering as an honor. A lot of people are afraid of suffering. So suffering for the sake of Christ, it is, when you understand and you look and you watch those people who suffer for Jesus, who are your pastors, who've mentored you. The man who mentored me was 27 years in prison. Just think about a man whose wife, when he would be released, it was 27 years. He would be for 5 years in prison. He would come back and he would open the door of his house and the kid would say, "Who is this, Mom?" Just think about it. Yeah. It is difficult for a woman to be in prison for the sake of Christ, because we had women, imprisoned. The man who led me to the Lord, himself and his wife, they had a ministry to the suffering families of prisoners for Christ. They took care of their sons and daughters. They took care of their spouses. What if it's husband? What if it's wife? His wife served the women, the wives of the pastors. Just to rationalize that is so difficult, because they would show up at your door, take your husband away, take your wife in the pajama, take her out, and she's gone. You don't know exactly where she is, and mama shows up 7 years or 9 years without knowing where she was. 9 years later, she shows up at the door. So that's how we taking suffering as a little tiny bit of what those who were before us went through.
So part of it is just really understanding like the suffering people went through to give you an opportunity to have faith, and the impact that has made in your life, and the willingness to say, I'm going to do that for somebody else. Which I'm sure has its roots in the beginning of your ministry and why you decided to be a pastor. Is that kind of how some of it started for your organization, you and your wife, Marina, New Hope Eurasia?
Yes. One of the men that helped us start, he started with Brother Andrew together, smuggling in the small Volkswagen and the double floors, New Testament into Romania, from Romania and, through the forest, over the rivers, over that, just electric fence that was all, I'm talking about 900 plus kilometers north to south of wires, going through the forest, through being shot dead, trying to get those Bibles in, So when you watch those lives and you are admiring them because they're still alive, they're still around, there's still those who are inspiring. And we want to be those our story, modern day stories, would inspire my kids and other generations that are coming after us. So if they took it in, if they accepted suffering as part of their life, as their process of following Jesus, if that was the path, and that inspired us, me, and others like me, then why not? I should take when it comes, so it becomes an inspiration. So it was literally a chain of people that have inspired each other, and that's how New Hope Eurasia has started. It was through this man who smuggled Bibles, and then after the fall of USSR, churches said, "Please don't leave us. We need you. Come, help us continue. We need more, Christian literature. We need Bibles. We need to be able to reach out to the kids and the youth, that young generation that is not being so much, marinated in atheism and communism."
I just think about the boldness and the risk that it takes to do something like that, and to know and love God with all of your heart, to push forward through that.
Well, and to know that you are suffering because of your love. You are facing this and this is the God you love.
But I'm not
so powerful.
the hero of Jesus. I want to be very careful here. I want you to say, I want you to know our Jesus is the real hero. His example on the cross is what inspired generation after generation of people. The look in the mouth of a lion, to hug a cross, even if it's upside down, your feet up and your hands down.
Yeah.
Or, to accept a tiny room with no windows, with minus 40, minus 50 Celsius in the middle of Siberia, and angels to serve you. The man, who inspired me the most was, who's, and many others whose bodies being, buried, these common graves or collective graves where we would not even know their names, but they are that cloud of witnesses. I'm not the hero. It's that Jesus is the hero. And, but, God is the one who wires us. I've been wired in that way. I always like to jump into those, areas where it's tough. I love tough tasks. I go to the restricted world, to countries where it's not allowed to go in. Yeah, I won't mention a country, but it was a country where, I went to the U.S. embassy and weeds were growing, trees were growing out of the windows, abandoned. All of the U.S. missionaries and Western missionaries were kicked out in 72 hours. And for 6 years, I was taking people in, I was taking them out. We would go in with, tons of materials, sneak them in, God is good. Almost got arrested, but anyway. That's, part of the story, part of the fun.
Yeah.
I would carry Bibles in the Muslim country of Turkey, and, just take it in. Over 1 million New Testament we put in the hands of the Muslims on the streets of a city. It's not a big city, it's 28 million people. But, just put on, in their hands, and seeing them saying this, it'll be an honor for me to do this to you.
Cut you across.
Look in the eyes of some of the religious leaders and they will tell me it'll be a great honor to kill this demon called Oleg and go to, to prison. I'm like, just do it. I recently had a situation like that. And I said, look, there's nothing that can stop you. Just click it. We would go to the places in Ukraine where nobody wants to go. Next week, I'm going to Kherson, to the places where nobody wants to go. I don't send my team there, but I like jumping into those places. It might cost me something, I know, but others paid the price as well.
So we could probably talk to you about this for like a million years, but I want to talk about kind of some of the efforts of New Hope Eurasia and some of the stuff that happened in Ukraine. So earlier this year, we got a chance to partner together to serve Ukraine and the people around the Ridge and the people of the Ridge and people on the listener on the podcast were able to give in different ways to help serve you guys' efforts in Ukraine. Could you talk just a little bit about what came from that? Like maybe some stories that stand out to you or yeah.
You know what? Definitely we're looking at the impact. Impact is the key word. I mean, we never do things without looking at how this is going to impact long-term their lives, how it's going to impact the kingdom of God, how it's going to impact churches, about empowering local churches to win these people for Jesus. So, let me tell you this story. So we are at this, refugee distribution center, and that's one of those, multiple places that we are helping and running together with local churches. Her name is Julia. She comes to meet my wife. My wife, she's also from Ukraine, born in Nikolaev, grew up as an orphan, but moved to Moldova, chasing her around. And that's what I got her to find her and marry that beautiful lady. And this Julia, she comes and hugs her. And we discovered that her husband is in the military, and he's on this line 0. So she burst into tears saying, please, would you mind praying for my husband? Because, all of this, we don't know exactly how is he going to make it out of it, out of that boiling pot. And literally my wife right there, and, both of them cried out to God. And that whole compassion of my wife that has been expressed to her, it moved Julia. She's got 2 boys, and she's been so excited about the fact that she said, can I come to your church? Is this a church for people like us? I said, well, my wife said, this is a church for everyone. We welcome anyone. And she's like, but will I understand it? Translation, into Russian, so you can understand, or Ukrainian, whatever is needed. She gets to come to our church, and this she's been praying, and she would come Mondays for study. She would come to serve, to the Sunday services. Her son, who is actually deaf, it was so powerful to see how they fell in love with the attitude of the church and just the love and the care. And then she said, look, my wife said, would you start praying for your husband daily? And I said, speak to your dad and encourage him. Tell him that you're proud of him whenever he's able to connect through the Starlink, with you. So they started doing that. And, my husband was like emotionally, because he went through, different situations, he was up and down, was a, rough guy. She said, after about a month of prayer, could not believe what I heard from my husband. A soft man, a loving word, an attitude that is being changed. And she's like, I am so happy that Jesus answers my question, my prayers. So she's been praying that he's alive out of the battlefield. And last Sunday, during the service, when she heard, she saw the message on her phone where her husband said, Kherson is set free. Russians are pulling. I'm coming home. And she like, yeah, she was jumping. She hugged with my wife. They're all crying. And, people are literally, we've done, not only distribution of food, but we've done literally camps for women that are out of, Ukraine, for the refugee ladies. We're now planning on doing winter camps for them. And men and women said the love and the care. And we've experienced Jesus afresh and not consider Jesus, church, Bible like we're now considering. This effort that you guys support and supported has made a way for us to be able to love on people, just be the hands and the feet of Jesus. Like we believe in this saying, preach Jesus always, sometimes choose the word.
That's powerful. That's awesome.
We want to do in the name of Jesus, as much as we can for the people and use word time and be able to introduce them to the one who is really the hope of the world.
And would you say that her faith with Jesus started with an opportunity to build a relationship with her, and over time you built that trust so that you were able to kind of open up the word?
You know what? First of all, Kelly, we actually allowed her to serve us. It's nothing wrong. People can serve. People can help. They know or they don't know Jesus. They can help. And I believe we got to help, let them help. Because helping them, helping others helps them. Process for her. And part of that restoration of hope. That she can also be of help, giving us a hand of volunteering, at the distribution of food, seeing her son, who's been waking up in the night, screaming, bombing, where the sirens are on, going through that trauma, or screaming out and saying, I see my dad dead, seeing all of that, coming out of that trauma, relationship with us, that honest care for them. And they saw us, because one thing is when you help people, you smile, but, they see you, who you are truly after you're done. And they saw that real honest love for the people that we have. And that was the move that actually moved her toward Jesus. And then that moment of us being available to cry and laugh and support. She was also moved the moment when, because they had to run, they had no shoes, nothing. And I actually got on my knee and I put shoes on her son, some tennis shoes that I had at home. And it fit them perfectly, fit him perfectly. That moved her because she saw what we do, how we are okay to get on a knee and wash the feet of people by just putting shoes, putting clothes on them. And then prayer, and then seeing our life, seeing our kids, seeing our church, how much we welcome people, no matter who they are. I think that was the whole process of getting to the point where, and then seeing how Jesus responds to her, to her prayers. See change happen. Then Jesus became real, more real for her. And then she was like, I'll put it, sorry, long answer, but let me put it in one sentence.
Good.
First of all, they get to love you, and then they get to love your book, and then they get to love your God. I think that's what we want.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think about the opportunity that we have with, say, something like Winter Wonderfest, which you don't have to be a part of the Ridge. You don't have to be a follower of Jesus to want to come into these doors and serve the least of these kids and families that live below the poverty line. You just have to have a heart to want to do good. And hopefully we plant a seed that God will grow.
In the beginning, we had 90% local, 10% Ukrainian volunteers. Now we have 90% Ukrainian volunteers helping in distribution of food and 10% local. So we can use local in other places to start and help. that's where healing starts.
Mm.
And that's where meaning, of life, purpose, dignity is restored. And that's where they understand. It's, blessed those not only who are receiving, but also who are giving.
Mm.
And those who are receiving can also begin, being part of that giving, effort.
What I so appreciate about just all the story, all the background, all of our conversation, Pastor Oleg, is just the way that you've continually pointed back to Jesus as the source of compassion, and how it's very just clearly evident that none of the serving, none of that, none of anything has really been about anything other than just serving people, loving them well, because of how Jesus loves them and loves you. And I think that it just shows a real authenticity and just a genuine compassion and genuine love. And so thank you so much for sharing with Kelly and I and all the listeners just your story. And I'm sure there's so much more and so many more questions, but thanks for sharing with us, and thanks for continually pointing us back to one who gives us the motivation to do all this, which is Jesus. So thank you.
Thank you as well. Thank you for what you made possible for us to be able to help so many people. Thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of people and their kids. Thank you so much for making such a difference, not only here in Milwaukee, but around the world. I think your church is awesome. I love you guys.
And we love you back. We can end it there.
Thank you. Let's love more.
There we go.
That's why we have the opportunity now. Let's do it. Yeah, because only together we can do much more.
Well, that was our conversation with Pastor Oleg, and I just want to thank him again for sharing his incredible story. I think the thing that will stick with me from this conversation more than anything was Oleg's crystal clear priority of putting Jesus above his own comfort. That has given him the boldness to be able to act on his faith, but also a service mindset that goes hand in hand with the boldness. See, our ability to speak about Jesus in a bold way should be combined with our boldness to serve others in an impactful way. And when those two things come together, God does some pretty remarkable things, just like he's done through Pastor Oleg. If you want to find out more about New Hope Eurasia, you can do so in the show notes. Well, thanks for listening to this episode of the Ridge Podcast. Share this with a friend, give us a rate and review, and then make sure to follow or subscribe so that you don't miss any hopeful and helpful conversations.